Welcome to AskPsychSessions, where we ask some of the best teachers in psychology questions from you, our audience. If you would like to send in a question or an idea for a conversation, please visit bit.ly/AskPsychSessions. That's bit.ly/AskPsychSessions, all lowercase, no spaces. And here's our next question. Here we are with Jane Halonen. Jane, here is a question that I actually started with. I did this question. And it is, do you ever give assignments that you don't give feedback on?
I do have activities in classes that don't necessarily have feedback. I don't think we owe feedback on everything that we ask students to do. But when I do give assignments that I think are more critical to the development of students, usually I give feedback, and the feedback is usually in the form of rubrics.
Okay, so there are certain things that instructors can give, and it would be like skill-building activities that you don't think need to necessarily have feedback associated with them, or is it reading activities, or how do you? Because I forget who asked me about this, but it was this came from a conversation where an instructor was just saying that they give their students things just to give them things to do, and not necessarily tied to assessment at all. Is that okay?
I think it's okay. What comes to mind for me is if you use think, pair, share, for example. There's a lot of activity that's going to go on in class which will improve student engagement, but when you get to the share part, you're not going to get to every single pair that's been talking. The assumption is the time that you're allocating to that is worthwhile because it's going to illustrate something that you're after in the class, but you may only be able to respond to 4 or 5 shares before you move on to whatever is coming next. So I think that's a good example of, yes, I'm expecting you to do this, and I'm not going to be able to give you feedback on your particular insight for what I'm after.
Great. Related to that, tell us about your rubric process. What have you learned about rubrics over the years?
Probably the most interesting thing about rubrics is they don't stop developing over time. A mentor of mine once said, the thing about assessment is it doesn't end. So the idea that you develop a rubric and then you can set it up and run it without tweaking is probably not okay because students change, your emphasis on content changes, and more important, I think it should be an iterative process, coming back in a feedback loop from what you learn from students, because you may find that your instructions are not clear and that you've got to go back and add a phrase or a sentence so that they have a better understanding of what you're providing feedback on. I also spend a lot of time having students self-assess. Here, you've done the assignment, now you're going to tell me how you did on the assignment before I look at it. That's a secret to grading. They grade themselves if the rubric is good.
And do they do that well?
Yeah.
Fairly?
Yeah. I know that's shocking, but I think it comes with some practice. In fact, I like to think of student self-assessment as a developmental process. So you might not start with a full-blown rubric, but you might say, here's your project you're about to turn in. Is this your best work? Yes or no?
Right.
And then if they say no...
Eric's here.
Yeah, he's going to chime in. I can see him.
So, hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
It's Eric. But Jane, are you talking specifically about your honors students when you're talking about the rubrics?
I am not.
Okay.
And you asked that in kind of a smug way, I have to say.
Well, the idea that students are grading themselves is a lovely thought for many of us listening, but I know that you tend to teach honors psychology students.
I do teach honors psychology every fall,
Gotcha.
but I also teach a 50-person positive psychology class.
Okay.
And so just as an example, all of my students in my 50-person positive psychology class have to have a presentation in my class. They have to be part of a presentation. And I have a rubric for that. And when we're done with the presentation, we do a critique. It has a kind of an American Idol feel to it. And I start with the students themselves and say, what are you most proud of in what you just did? take a breath. You're across the finish line. No one died. Yay. Now tell me what you're proud of. Then tell me if you had a little bit more time, what would you have done differently to make it better? And then they are pretty candid. They'll say, oh, the graphics were bad, or I think we messed up the explanation of negative reinforcement. And then I open it to the crowd and say, okay, so you're going to help these people improve in this area for the future. Tell them what they did that was good, and tell them what they did that would improve things. And so, yes, they do get to be pretty sophisticated in understanding the quality of their own work. I want them to be independent of me because I'm not going to follow them around the rest of their lives saying, ooh, A. So that's the goal, self-assessment to build in that metacognitive reflection.
Do you ever, I'm sorry, this is probably not meant to be back and forth.
I thought you said you weren't going to join in. No, no, please go ahead. What was your...
In a 50-person class, do you get your students to be able to give their colleagues meaningful feedback beyond the superficial things? So you don't want them to be mean, but you also want them to be honest. Can you get them to that safe space?
I think I can.
Yeah, I'll bet you can. I worry that I can't.
Okay. Well, all right, so some tips about that is to expect that students are human, and that when asked to provide feedback to others, they're going to take the path of least resistance and say, that was really good. Mm-hmm. And then I say, how was it really good? And then they look at me like you're looking at me now with great big eyes. Oh my gosh, now what am I going to say?
Right. And I think they can do the good part, but it's when you press them for the how should they improve, they can't give details.
I think they can, but if they're operating from a rubric, if they know what I'm judging the performance on, and I assist that process whenever the assignment rolls out, the first person who goes is going to be the guinea pig. And so we all go through the rubric and we all say, would this be a 9? Would this be a 10? What's the sentiment of the group? What's your justification for that? So I get them comfortable with that. And I've been impressed with how the skills grow over time. But you have to expect in the beginning, no, they're not going to be good.
I think that's a really important point.
So I think that's why starting with, is this your best work? And so sometimes if I have some luxury of time, if a student says to me, no, it's not my best work, I said, would it be if I gave you 2 more days on it? And then they think, so class, I'm going to give you, all of you, 2 more days. I want your best work. And then that tends to produce really good work and a great lesson about time management.
Makes it easier on you, too, when you go to grade it.
You betcha. And anything that you can do to ease grading, I'm all for it.
So, Eric, I've seen this slide that you have in a talk that you give. And it's and maybe it's not about the slide. Maybe it's just about what you're saying is that you don't know the difference between a C+ and a B-.
Yeah, I don't use pluses and minuses, but I respect that other people do.
Well, okay, that's fine. But here's my question: we're talking about rubrics. We're talking about assessment. Mm-hmm. What do you think is a good what? Because I think that what you said at that talk where you were talking about this not knowing the difference between these two grades, I think it was really helpful for me. And what are the buckets that you used in the end?
So, if you use pluses and minuses, it's 13 buckets from F to D- up to A+. I can't tell 13 shades of gray, personally. I respect that Jane Halonen can, but I can't on an assignment. I don't have a rubric with that many levels and shades. I know at the end of my semester I have to submit grades. So I am going to use 5 buckets at the end. But the rubrics that I use, I design with 3 buckets: novice, competent, and proficient. And I am very confident with reliability and validity, I can over and over identify work in those 3 buckets. And I try to define my rubrics like that.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about this?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because I was at that wonderful talk. That was the Charles Brewer Teaching Award talk. And it prompted me to think, now why am I using 13? So I went back and redesigned some of my grading. I did. To have an F and a D, because I think that I can make a qualitative distinction between F and D. I retained C pluses and Cs. I got rid of C minuses because I think that's one of those gray areas. And then I retained the regular buckets for Bs and As, in part because I think I can distinguish those as well, the ones that are super competent versus the ones that are not quite as competent. But it did reduce my buckets listening to you make that claim.
Well, and I respect that because for me, the D and F bucket is novice, the B and C bucket is competent, and the A bucket is proficient.
And that is the way I tend to think about grading.
Yeah.
My buckets are exceed standard, meet standard, below standard.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Exactly.
And I
Yeah.
can tell the difference. But grading was pretty rough until I figured that out. I never felt great about my ability to assess where a student was when I had a more complex rubric, because that's how we started, was that you use rubrics.
Right.
So are your rubrics, would you say, and now they're always changing and you're getting feedback about them, but are they simple so that students can understand them?
They are simple. They're weighted, and they usually have distinctions. So if I'm doing writing, for example, a category might be sets appropriate context. Did they do it in a stellar way? That's worth a 10 or a 9 rating. Did they do it in a competent way? That's a 7 or an 8 rating. And you can see how it goes from there. And when I'm working with students in trying to understand the rubric, that process of voting, what would you say? Make us across the point that Eric is saying, that it's really hard to make those judgments. As well, you have to factor in the evaluation bias that people have. People might be surprised that I have a positive evaluation bias, that I tend to be a little bit more generous than most people. And I have colleagues and actual students who provide ratings that they go at the negative side. And so going through that process of, this is what it looks like, this is the spread, this is our best consensus on what your grade is. I will say the downside of having grades with points is it does produce grade grubbing behavior, which I absolutely despise.
Well, and for me, fewer buckets actually has decreased grade grubbing.
I'm sure it does.
Yeah. Because now I'm not arguing with my students about pluses and minuses. And by the way, I have stopped putting percentages on my syllabus. So I don't put 90%, 80%, 70%. I actually put the number of points. And I don't use fractional points either. So I don't get the question about rounding up. There is no rounding up.
Yeah.
They're whole points.
Yeah.